The Black Horse Regiment, the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, brought a new look to Vietnam. The natural barriers and unfriendly terrain in Vietnam make it tough for today's modern machines of war. But surprisingly, American mechanized units have surmounted these obstacles through ingenuity and sheer determination. And it takes determination, especially when you can't see what's ahead, even 10 feet away. A jungle might seem like a strange place for armored vehicles that can cover hundreds of miles per day in open country. Yet when the enemy can be anywhere, armor means a lot to the foot soldier. Armor helps the soldier beat a path. Armor means firepower, that extra wallop that keeps the enemy from concentrating his forces. Today's mechanized cavalry means mobility and speed, a prime requirement of modern warfare. Since their arrival in Vietnam, the cavalry troopers of the Black Horse Regiment have built a proud record of accomplishment while fulfilling their military missions. Under unique battlefield conditions never before encountered by mechanized ground forces, they built a record of leadership, of ingenuity, spirit, and valor that will always live in the annals of the 11th Armored Cavalry in Vietnam. New ways to do old jobs had to be found, and these men were equal to the task. The 3rd Corps area where the regiment was assigned contains the capital of South Vietnam, Saigon, important cities such as Binh Hoa and the Rice Bowl provinces. It also included strategic areas such as the Elephant's Ear and the trackless jungles of the Cambodian border. As an independent force in this vital area, the 11th Armored Cavalry gave needed support to elements of U.S. and Allied forces. Immediately after arrival at the port of Vung Tau in September 1966, the regiment moved to the important headquarters base of Long Binh for staging. Then onward to Xuan Loc and the creation of its own base camp. The regiment was welcomed by General Creighton Abrams, later commander of all U.S. forces in Vietnam. He discussed equipment and organization with Colonel Cobb, the regiment's first commander in Vietnam. At the conclusion of his welcoming visit, General Abrams was impressed with this vital new fighting team. The familiar armored personnel carriers had been beefed up for the counterinsurgency mission in Vietnam. Each vehicle was fitted with 2 additional machine guns, and modification of armor gave crewmen greater protection. The crew of 5 men included the vehicle commander, driver, grenadier, and gunners. The result was the Armored Cav Assault Vehicle, or ACAV, the key vehicle of the new light armored platoons. After it had been proved in combat, the ACAV was soon employed in other units throughout Vietnam. Heavier armor, typified by the M48 tank, provided each squadron with a big punch. The newest armored vehicle with the 11th is the Sheridan. It mounts a 152mm gun, which also launches the Shillelagh missile. Self-propelled artillery was also part of the squadrons and was assigned to individual units in whatever mix the commander required. In the days ahead, artillery support would prove to be a valuable asset. At first, the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment was equipped with self-propelled 105mm howitzers. Later, these were to be replaced by 155mm howitzers, which have greater range. The regiment became a completely mobile reconnaissance and striking force. They became the only freewheeling armored unit of its kind in combat in Vietnam. Within its squadrons were custom vehicles and special purpose weapons, such as heavy mortars capable of devastating fire, and highly trained mobile advisory scouts. A Thunder Horse troop of air cavalry. Within 3 weeks of arrival, units of the 11th had met the enemy, beginning with a fight for the regiment's line of communication. The Viet Cong had plenty of warning as the long lines of armor rolled down the roads and into the northern sector of the Corps area. Friendly observers reported the enemy was rising to the bait, preparing ambushes. In Operation Atlanta, the men of the 11th routed the ambushes with overwhelming firepower, taking a heavy toll in enemy dead and captured. Many of the enemy's weapons were seized. Best of all, the Viet Cong learned respect for the regiment at the outset. And the people of Long Can province were free again. This initial success made the task easier. As the Black Horse base camp began to grow, its resupply and security gained importance. Headquarters became a hub of activity. Everywhere the camp was being developed into a comfortable main base, even though a large part remained under canvas. Communications were an important reason for the camp's existence. Powerful electronics equipment at the Tactical Operations Center allowed full communications with higher headquarters at Long Binh, and with field units which had mobile armored command posts. When in position, these field units were made secure against enemy night raids. Concertina wire encircled the area. During daylight hours, these forward outposts were busy centers of planning and direction. In all, this communications network proved an outstanding support for the troopers in the field. Fanning out from the base, armored convoys patrolled the area and protected vital supply lines as they kept the roads open. Often an armored patrol guarded an important junction or other strategic point. After long hours of patrolling far from their base, men and vehicles would pull off the road to rest. During these short periods of respite, however, the alert troopers never wandered very far from their vehicles. Purely and simply, this was enemy country. For days at a time, they were on duty 24 hours a day. But they never dropped their guard, and it was mighty hard for Charlie to disturb the peace. In January 1967, Operation Cedar Falls swept the Iron Triangle area northwest of Saigon, a long-time enemy hideout. The 11th Armored Cavalry acted as a pushing force, beating the bushes for the enemy, driving them into a waiting blocking force composed of main U.S. and Allied forces. It was a tough, dangerous job, much of it in country where a man could not see the front of his vehicle from the driver's seat. Mile by mile, the men of the Black Horse Regiment helped flush the VC out of their tunnels. They found everything and anything which the enemy could use to carry out his mission. No road was safe from VC booby traps. Here, a hole to trap our vehicles with a path left for the enemy to use. The answer to this one, beat a new path and move on. The operation was an unqualified success. Documents captured from the enemy attested to the hardships they had suffered as the armored units closed in. Then came the Rice Bowl country. In the Vodot region, the men of the Black Horse helped keep the fields and the roads free, so the crop would be safe from seizure by the Viet Cong. Also, the presence of armored units kept the peace and kept the enemy from intimidating the villagers. Bridges launched by armored vehicles were often laid down to keep traffic flowing. Flash flooding of small streams washed away the crude, locally built bridges, and buses were unable to make their scheduled destinations. The military bridges helped speed them on their way. The prime purpose of road and highway upkeep, however, was to keep the region open for the fluent movement of military convoys. Here in the Vodot region, this scissors bridge was a useful complement to the regiment's armored strength. It could be erected or removed quickly and without any construction work. In addition to aiding military vehicular traffic, these portable bridges opened newer and shorter routes to nearby marketplaces for the villagers and farmers of the area. As the need presented itself, these scissors bridges were moved from one locale to another with ease and speed. In the province of Tai Ninh, along the Cambodian border in the country called the Elephant's Ear, units of the 11th penetrated into terrain previously considered too rough for vehicles. Once again, the men of the 11th Armored Cavalry beat the jungle, pressing forward regardless of terrain. There, in the dense rainforests, they went after the enemy's hiding places. And the enemy was there. Once again, the assigned mission was accomplished. In Operation Junction City, a sweep through Tai Ninh and War Zone C during July 1967, roam plows cleared the jungle along the roadsides. Military convoys and the South Vietnamese people could use the roads in greater safety. From the air, it was now possible to spot any Viet Cong activity near these vital roadways. Tanks were used to keep the roads open at strategic points, firing to keep the enemy off balance. During the operation, command and control were maintained through the airborne units, making it easier for field commanders to visit various units often. The air cavalry troop of the regiment, known as Thunder Horse, had its own helicopter gunships and transports. Forward air controllers performed effective liaison between the Air Force and our armored units. By August 1967, Black Horse Base Camp was well established and offered the returning troopers many of the comforts of home. The return to action comes all too soon. with the almost unbelievable complication of trying to fight a war in which both friends and enemies might be found in the same general area, extreme accuracy is a must when firing heavy weapons. Special weapons like this 4.2-inch mortar mounted in carriers provide additional fire support to the squadrons.
Fire!
But it isn't all fighting. Men of the 11th Cav worked closely with soldiers of the South Vietnamese Army to help train local cadre in self-defense. The maintenance and use of field communications equipment was one of the primary training courses. Other instruction included weapons, such as the carbine. Drills for crews serving mortars soon familiarized the Allied soldiers with these weapons. And as we worked with them, the ARVN soldiers gained confidence. It was now late fall of 1967. As the war continued and operations expanded, the safety of convoys became a continuing responsibility. A young security officer of the 3rd Squadron makes sure his men understand their orders and special road instructions. Then the long haul over dirt roads begins. Enemy hijackers waiting to seize this valuable convoy of supplies will call it off when they see the armored units. The Medical Civilian Assistance Program was also guarded against surprise by the 11th Cav, while hundreds of people who had no other medical care were treated. Here, the doctors and medical staff were enabled to care for young and old alike without fear of being interrupted in their work. In Operation Santa Fe, the 11th worked with the Australians who learned to use the American equipment. The Aussies handled the American armor like veterans. During Operation Santa Fe in Xuan Loc province, the Aussies conducted a large sweeping operation, driving the enemy forces into the waiting trap set up by the armored units of the Black Horse Regiment. The operation went off with clock-like precision as the Australians pressed the enemy back. Armored flamethrowers were used to clear tree lines and suspected enemy positions. Then came the Vietnamese New Year, Tet. The enemy chose this occasion to unleash well-coordinated attacks in several areas of the Republic. Everywhere, the Viet Cong were met with counterattacks. Striking treacherously where least expected, the Viet Cong brought the war to the cities of South Vietnam. Gunfire roared in the streets and panic spread throughout the population. The 11th Cav rose to the challenge, and in a lightning-fast road march from the area near Cambodia, raced to the defense of the embattled cities. There they supported the ARVN troops, cutting off enemy escape routes. The city of Bin Hoa was secured by the armored assault of the 3rd Squadron, in which the enemy was routed in house-to-house fighting. The 11th was also sent to the defense of the capital, Saigon. Large areas of the capital's residential section had been laid to waste by concentrated Viet Cong rocket attacks and mortar bombardment. The people, displaced, wandered aimlessly through the district. In the midst of all this, the fighting continued as military police patrolled the city. Day and night, in the alleys and in the streets, the relentless hunt for Charlie carried the armored cavalrymen into every nook and cranny of the capital. The enemy was forced to give ground with appalling losses. The Arvin forces distinguished themselves during the Tet campaign, acting aggressively to free their cities. Wherever they went, they were solidly backed by armor, often that of the 11th Armored Cavalry or their own armor. A few days after the initial attacks, the Arvin began to retake and free the cities. Soon it became evident that communications had been secured. The bridges remained open. Once again, traffic began to flow with armored vehicles everywhere. The Cholan area, the so-called Chinatown of Saigon. Here, after the first victories at Bin Hoa and Saigon, the 11th Cav stayed in the thick of the fight. Troopers of the Black Horse moved methodically from block to block, probing into every building along the way. Finally, it became apparent the Viet Cong had left the area, and there would be no more battles in the streets. As the cities were pacified and the people could begin to pick up the blasted pieces of their lives, the Valorous Unit Award was granted to the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment by the Secretary of the Army. In part, it said, the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment was a major factor in eliminating the enemy threat. The men of the regiment displayed extraordinary heroism and devotion to duty, which are in keeping with the highest traditions of the military service. And so the tide of Tet was quickly turned from threat to opportunity as the Allied forces launched crushing blows against the enemy in the 3rd Corps area. Wherever Viet Cong underground fortifications were discovered, they were blown sky high. In Operation Wiat Than, which means resolve to win, the men of the Black Horse, together with the 25th Arvin Division, moved northwest of Saigon. The Arvin troops, with confidence, went in after the enemy. Here the tanks and ACAVs maneuvered like cavalry and did so for 41 straight days, supporting the Arvin troops wherever they went. There was a lot of hard, dangerous work ferreting out the Viet Cong. The enemy, long in control of this area, had over a period of years burrowed into the earth, creating a labyrinth of underground fighting and sleeping positions. Searching through this complex was not only difficult, but time-consuming. In every way, the Black Horse Regiment had earned its spurs. By early spring 1968, the Black Horse insignia, granted under fire in Vietnam, became a symbol of valor. Searching for communist mines was an unpleasant task. In order to maintain regular convoys, the roads were checked by mine-sweeping teams every day. The enemy, operating under cover of darkness, would plant mines along the most heavily traveled roads, despite the best efforts of our patrols. A portion of the road safe today was unsafe tomorrow. Almost every mine sweep uncovered something lethal. a Chinese communist 20-pound mine, big enough to blow the tracks off an ACAV. Once uncovered, these mines were destroyed by demolition experts using charges of plastic explosives. For these men, this is the daily war, the no-headline war of nerve-wracking uncertainty, of constant plodding and searching where every footstep may lead to injury or death. This is modern mine warfare, brought to new dimensions by a cunning enemy. Despite everything, however, the 11th Armored Cavalry continues to forge ahead. In a land where even the earth itself fights against men and machines, the vast logistics of maintenance and repair keep them rolling. In the open country, through the jungles, and in the cities. Throughout the 3rd Corps area, or wherever they are needed, the men of the regiment fight on for freedom with the help of armored mobile firepower. These are the men who proudly wear the insignia of the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment in Vietnam. Symbol of valor, the Black Horse patch.
Gallant American soldiers, these Ivy men of the 4th Infantry Division, were dealt a tough hand in the Vietnam War. It was their lot to draw the almost impenetrable jungle of the 2nd Corps area near the Cambodian border to face the elite regular North Vietnamese army. Assigned to a narrow corridor honeycombed with North Vietnamese units operating all the way from the Cambodian border to the coastal plain of South Vietnam, the courageous Ivy men carried the war to the enemy and faced him toe-to-toe for a slug-out that ended in triumph for the 4th Infantry Division and a greatly expanded area of influence for the 2nd Corps. This is the heroic story of the 4th Infantry Division in Vietnam. During 2 earlier wars, the 4th Division had built a solid tradition of courage and the capacity to overcome the enemy. Organized in 1917, the Ivy Division, so called because of the Roman numerals in its name, earned campaign streamers at the Marne, Chateau Thierry, Saint Mihiel, Verdun, and the Argonne Forest. In World War II, they spearheaded the drive along the Siegfried Line and were heavily engaged in the Battle of the Bulge. They were the first to smash ashore on Utah Beach. the first to set foot on German soil, and among the first to enter Paris. And now the 4th Division was in action again, this time in Vietnam. In the summer of 1966, more than 3,000 men of the U.S. 4th Infantry Division arrived in Quy Nhon, on the coast of South Vietnam, to continue the American buildup in that beleaguered country. As the advance contingent stepped ashore, they were welcomed by the Vietnamese and by their commander, General William C. Westmoreland. They then boarded buses to the airstrip for the last leg of the journey to their base camp near Pleiku, within the 2nd Corps area, which was located between the Cambodian border to the west and the South China Sea. The 1st Cavalry was already established in a narrow corridor at An Khe, but seasoned North Vietnamese Army units in regimental size controlled the great bulk of the area. The Central Highlands, difficult terrain made up of jungle, mountains, and waterways with the highest incidence of malaria in Vietnam. This was the lot of the 4th Division. The division base was established at Dragon Mountain, renamed Camp Inari, after Lieutenant Mark S. Inari, the first Ivy officer to fall in Vietnam. The rainy season was just beginning, and operations were severely hampered. But neither the weather nor the harassing enemy could deter the Ivymen, who were determined to make the area their own. The engineers arrived with the division's advance party and quickly began to carve at the base of Dragon Mountain in what would soon become a city in the jungle. With security details always on alert against sudden attack, the men of the 4th cleared the area and established their quarters. Mortar-proof bunkers and fortifications were built. Metal runways were set down for aircraft landing strips. And roads were slashed through the jungle to keep convoys rolling and troops on the move. Within little more than a year, the Ivy Division base camp contained more than 900 buildings. The harsh countryside was peopled mostly by Montagnards, a nomadic people who slash and burn clearings in the forest, farm it for a time, then move on. Harassed and terrorized by the Viet Cong, these simple folk fell victims of a time and circumstance they could not fathom. A need to evacuate the Montagnards to safer areas became apparent as enemy activity increased around their villages. A program was evolved for the resettlement and care of the Montagnards. In each move, the entire village was lifted bodily, huts, belongings, and all, and transported to a more secure location. The men of the 4th Division helped to create a tight bond between the Montagnards and their country. Ivy men swept through the steaming jungle near the Cambodian border, seeking to block North Vietnamese regiments who periodically dashed across the border in hopes of a quick victory. Often, small units of Ivy men would suddenly clash with overwhelming numbers of the enemy, who pounced with swift ferocity. when the big guns of the 4th were called in for support and the heavy lead began to fly, the North Vietnamese Army, the NVA, disengaged as quickly as they had appeared. In that autumn and winter of '66, the enemy were often able to elude our pursuing fighters. We hit them from the air. But they were adept at camouflage and could only be flushed on the ground. But if that's what it took, the Ivy men were ready. They embarked on a series of search and clear missions to locate the enemy and to rout him. The big mobile guns continued to do their share in dispersing the enemy. In operations like this and similar actions in early '67, the powerful partnership of heavy mobile guns and Ivy infantry combined to pin down large enemy units and methodically beat them into the ground. Operation Sam Houston grew out of an attempt by the Viet Cong to interrupt work on a vital road being built from Pleiku to a Special Forces camp near the Cambodian border. The road building crew had been the target of numerous mortar attacks and the scene of violent firefights. Despite intelligence reports of a large mass of NVA units, elements of the 4th Division moved through difficult terrain to meet the elusive enemy. There were few landing zones in the dense jungle, and areas had to be cleared before resupply ships could bring in supplies and take out the sick or injured. This was the only physical link with the outside. Choppers were called in for all types of assignments. Top priority went to combat assault missions. To spot enemy concentrations under the umbrella of dense jungle foliage, light observation helicopters were used. Once they located the enemy, the light spotters called for their big brothers, the heavily armed Huey gunships. These choppers pack an impressive resource of firepower. The gunships strike quickly, with uncanny accuracy and formidable power. Their presence on the scene was welcomed by the ground troops below, who moved in quickly to exploit the gunship attack. For the NVA, this technique was a costly experience, resulting in a great loss of men, installations, and equipment. While their buddies hacked and beat their way through the thick jungle in the north, the 3rd Brigade of the 4th Division, working with the Vietnamese Army, was assigned to War Zone C along the southern waterway. In the winter of '67, this task force spearheaded the action in Operation Cedar Falls. Positioned along the southern sector of the Saigon River, a mechanized battalion of Ivy men was charged with a twofold mission: to engage in clear and hold operations along the river, and to block the escape route of fleeing Viet Cong. As so often happened in the course of their mission, Ivy men uncovered a rich cache of rice left behind by the VC, which was airlifted out for distribution to the South Vietnamese. Hard on the heels of Operation Cedar Falls came Operation Gadsden, in which a battalion of Ivy men fought together with elements of the 25th Division. On one of their many sweeps deep in the jungle near Cambodia, they succeeded in taking a division-sized Viet Cong complex. At first, the Americans had met heavy resistance, but on the second day, they moved in and found that overnight, the enemy had abandoned the area. The complex was there to be taken. At the same time, within the 2nd Corps area, the 4th Division concentrated on expanding its area of influence. With determination and tenacity, they hit the enemy with tremendous firepower. Between contacts with the enemy, the existence of the 4th Division was characterized by long periods of watchful waiting, with time for relaxation. And time to do the hard work that needed doing. Then, all at once, short but brutal pitched battles. And that was the pattern until, in April of 1967, the 1st and 2nd Brigade moved into Operation Francis Marion, while operating from bases nicknamed Jackson Hole and the Oasis. The objective was to screen and guard the strategic border west of Pleiku. Throughout the extensive operation, units of the Fighting Fourth had clashed with the well-equipped North Vietnamese troops infiltrating into South Vietnam, moving men and equipment quickly into place to block enemy forces wherever they chose to cross the border. During the operation, massive artillery was employed. More than 400,000 rounds hit the enemy where it hurt. This devastating firepower was a major factor in quelling the enemy offensive and in demoralizing the NVA forces. While the rest of the division enjoyed the successes of Operation Francis Marion, the Ivy men of the 3rd Brigade swung into Operation Cook. Convinced that most of the villages and hamlets in the area around Duc Pho were either Viet Cong or sympathetic to them, the 3rd Brigade undertook an intensive search operation. Countless tunnels and holes in the area turned up Viet Cong supplies and prisoners. But along with the spoils, the Ivy men had to pay a price for victory. In the fall of '67, a North Vietnamese Army regiment moved into the Ia Drang Valley from the sanctuary of the Cambodian mountains to threaten the Special Forces camp at Ple Mai. An area sweep was undertaken. Contact was immediately established. NVA patrols were particularly active around roads, but round-the-clock Ivy operations effectively neutralized the threat. The men of the 4th succeeded in blocking the NVA thrust to destroy Ple Mai, while simultaneously blocking thrusts as far south as Ban Mi Thuc. At the same time, intelligence reported a heavy enemy buildup in the dusty, inhospitable valley near Dak To, 55 miles north of Pleiku. The Ivy men men quickly responded to the challenge, moving the infantry battalions of the 1st Brigade into the rugged mountains near the Cambodian and Laotian borders. They found the enemy dug in along all major terrain features. True to their tradition of courage and daring, the men of the 4th worked their way up enemy-held hills. With an airstrip at Dak To under constant attack by 122mm rockets, Ivy men slugged it out in the surrounding hills in sharp-pitched fights against a shrewd, well-trained, entrenched enemy. The final battle at Dak To occurred on the northern slopes of Hill 875. And on Thanksgiving Day, in the 5th and final day of the assault, they hit the hill continuously with airstrikes. Artillery and mortar rounds. Air Force strikes destroyed whatever cover the NVA might have used in defense of their position. Against all odds, Ivy men air assaulted Hill 875, cutting off a vital supply and withdrawal route for the North Vietnamese. In doing so, the fighting force proved they could win a major confrontation with NVA regulars. The support of all units was vital to the success of the battle. The cry medic, shouted on the battlefield, threw into operation the most sophisticated facilities known to man in wartime. Within moments of the call, medics were on hand to treat and evacuate the injured. During the Battle of Dak To, the Ivy men fought against 5 North Vietnamese regiments. This involved 3 U.S. brigades, supported by 17 batteries of artillery, resulting in more than 1,600 of the enemy killed in action. Throughout the rugged Central Highlands, the most significant battles were for the hilltops, since the force that controlled the hilltops controlled the valleys below. The 4th Division fought to seize the most strategic hilltops for fire bases. This meant several days of saturation airstrikes. And artillery fire. After the infantry had forged its way to the top, a bunker-type perimeter defense was constructed, followed by a land-clearing operation. When completed, the hilltop was a barren, dusty knob protruding from the valley floor. But even then, the area was by no means secure and had to be defended against enemy assaults. Combat patrols were sent to seek out and ambush the enemy. Forward observers pinpointed enemy positions for Ivy artillery. While in the valley, pursuit of the NVA continued. Contributing to the victory at Dak To were the big tanks and tracked vehicles of the division's armor. These rumbling giants brought new dimensions of firepower, mobility, and shock action to the ground fighting. A A Viet Cong ambush on a convoy was abruptly turned into a rout when tanks and armored personnel carriers moved into action. In short order, they had the enemy on the run. At one time, military leaders believed that the use of armor in the jungled mountains was impractical. But a tank battalion, 2 tank-laden cavalry squadrons, and a mechanized infantry battalion fulfilled a variety of successful missions with the 4th Division. These included search and clear, fire support, perimeter defense, road security, convoy protection, and service as a mobile reaction force. Thanks to its impressive record, armor and mechanized infantry became an integral part of the military posture in the Central Highlands. The month-long Battle of Dak To, part of Operation MacArthur, was the turning point for the 4th Division in the 2nd Corps area. But they continued to fight the enemy wherever they found him. At Linlock, harassment of the evasive enemy was almost a daily occurrence. In the Antennae Valley, after lacerating enemy artillery fire, Ivy men were sent out to engage an NVA force of battalion strength. Again, the phantom enemy evaporated when surprise and favorable odds were not his, leaving behind considerable arms and equipment. And numerous graves. In the Antennae Valley, too, a vital landing zone had to be secured so that needed communications equipment and supplies could be flown in. Units of Ivy men closed in on the NVA positions and met with heavy small arms fire. But in the end, the enemy was neutralized and the landing zone secured. As the struggle went on, a new enemy buildup in the Dak To area was reported in the winter of '68. Troops of Ivy men were airlifted for an assault on Strategic Hill 1049. Wave after wave of helicopters lifted the fighting men into the assault. Moving with the precision of a well-integrated combat force, the seasoned Ivy men forged their way through enemy-held positions and took the hill in 5 sorties. From their newly won hilltop advantage, the men of the 4th were then able to send out numerous short-range reconnaissance patrols to locate the enemy and report their position. Mortar fire was then poured into the positions to pin the enemy down. AH-1G Huey Cobras swept in with rockets and raking machine gun fire. And superior firepower and mobility prevented the North Vietnamese from mounting even one major offensive in the area. Thanks to the short-range reconnaissance patrols and their supporting units, threat after threat to the 4th Division area was eliminated. The 4th Division has been eminently successful in the Central Highlands. Within 2 years, their zone of influence increased tenfold, covering some 10,000 square miles of rugged terrain. That's the story. The success of the 4th Division's mission was due to the dedication of young men working as a team. Each man was totally devoted to the job at hand and to his fellow soldier, dedicated to give the best that was in him, because that was the best way out for himself, too. The 4th Division, answering its third call to arms, saw its duty in Vietnam's Central Highlands and did it with dignity and distinction. The officers and men of the seasoned 4th Infantry Division stand fully prepared to defeat communist aggression and give the people of South Vietnam the opportunity to live in peace and in freedom. Throughout Vietnam, the ivy patch is worn proudly by ivy men and feared by the enemy.
From Korea to Germany. From Alaska to Puerto Rico. All over the world, the United States Army is on the alert to defend our country, you, the American people, against aggression. This is the big picture. An official television report to the nation from the United States Army. Now, to show you part of the big picture, here is Sergeant Stuart Queen.
How do you do? The fighting in Korea has pointed up the importance of firepower and mobility for our Army. The men of our armored force can boast of both qualities of modern warfare. Here is our armored force in action, in training camps at home, overseas in Europe, and in Korea.
The prolonged bitter fighting in Korea has again demonstrated the versatility of armor. Working side by side with the rifleman, the soldier in the tank has written a new chapter in the history of warfare. The irregular valleys and jagged hills of Korea were once considered impossible tank country. Nonetheless, the tankers found new ways to use their land destroyers and remain in the fight throughout the campaign. After overcoming many of nature's obstacles, tanks fulfilled a variety of missions. They were the short, hard punch of limited infantry attacks, destroying enemy machine guns and blasting enemy bunkers, which held up the advance of the UN foot soldier. United States armor engaged the enemy shortly after the original communist surprise attack. In the early, desperate days of the Korean fighting, light Chaffees used in the Japanese occupation were thrown into battle by elements of the 24th Division. Tank-supported infantry defended the historic Pusan perimeter, a thin line around our last toehold in Korea. When the UN surprise landing behind the enemy lines at Incheon relieved the pressure in the south, an armored task force of the 1st Cavalry Division broke through the Naktong River line for a rapid drive north. Coordinated with this sweep of armor was the drive of the 7th Infantry Division southward from Incheon. When these two forces met, they trapped 50,000 North Korean troops, defeating the communist plans for a quick victory. Immediately, the 8th Army seized the initiative and sped north to demoralize and destroy the retreating North Koreans. UN forces crossed the 38th parallel, and this time, their advance included the prize of North Korea, Pyongyang, its capital.
Even while American tankers were fighting their way into Pyongyang, Red forces retreating to Manchuria were being cut off 38 miles north of the town by paratroopers of the 187th Airborne Regiment. Another trap had been set, this time between paratroopers and men of the armored force. When tanker and paratrooper met, they had wiped out organized enemy resistance in Korea. The Korean fighting was renewed with the entry of massive Red Chinese forces. In the many months of seesaw fighting which followed, 8th Army tanks backed up the infantry all along the battlefront. Sherman and Patton tanks figured prominently in halting the Chinese attack and in the counterdrive that led to the recapture of Seoul. A tank infantry team was the first to recross the 38th parallel. The soldier in the tank and the soldier with the rifle combined teamwork and team spirit, living up to the rich traditions of cavalry and infantry. Here's a demonstration of how tanks and infantry fight. The rifleman clears the way for the tanks, while the tanks use their machine guns to destroy enemy automatic fire. Despite the rugged Korean terrain, the tank has performed an endless variety of services. It has climbed up steep hills, cooperated with the Air Force in joint attacks, and provided accurate covering fire for infantry units engaged in probing enemy positions on high ground. Where necessary, it has acted as a long-range gun, along with howitzers and mortars, to pound fortified hill positions. Modified, it has even built roads. American armor has fought against overwhelming enemy strength. The results were measured in enemy casualties and prisoners of war. The tank has unique characteristics, placing it apart from any other modern weapon. Let's take a closer look at these characteristics which make it so formidable in the field. First superiority of the tank is its prodigious firepower. Second, its mobility. That is, speed and capacity to maneuver. Third, its armored protection. Since the days of medieval knights, man has attempted to place a protective barrier between himself and enemy weapons. Today, modern armor keeps pace with the increasing effectiveness of projectiles. The major factor in tank planning is the ratio between tank firepower and tank size, which affects the tank's mobility. Planners know that a tank's maneuverability and speed may be as protective to the tank as its firepower. Finally, the tank brings into combat a psychological factor. Its shock action. This combination of elements put to work in support of the infantry multiply the range and effectiveness of the foot soldier, who in turn lends his nimbleness and broader field of vision to the tank crew. The rifleman can direct tank fire by smoke fire of his own, which calls the target to the tank's attention, or by hand signals, or radio telephone. He can set off a prearranged flare signal. Let's see how the small infantry tank team goes into action. First, there's a briefing by the task force commander. Next, there's a maintenance check of all equipment. The small unit leaders of infantry and tanks who will team together receive their specific orders. This is followed by a reconnaissance of the terrain, always carried out personally by the leaders. At each hour, the tanks move out of their assembly areas. They reach their attack positions as the riflemen advance across the line of departure. On command, the tanks support the infantry with heavy overfire. As the attack continues, riflemen and tanks advance together. Coordinated fire keeps the enemy pinned down. Many factors determine who leads the advance, tanks or infantry. Here, in a wooded area where the vision of a tank commander may be limited, riflemen take the lead and serve as the eyes of the steel giants. Reaching open country, the tanks, immune to small arms fire, take over the lead to seek and destroy enemy machine guns whose fire is deadly to the riflemen. Close teamwork is the key to success. Here, an enemy anti-tank gunner is nailed by heads-up action on the part of a rifleman. Approaching the enemy trenches, heavy automatic fire forces the riflemen to take cover, but the protected tanks roll through the fire and over the enemy positions, enabling final mop-up action by the riflemen. Behind the complex operation of America's armored forces stand years of intensive training. This usually begins at Fort Knox, Kentucky, designated as the home of armor when the armored force was created as a separate military arm in 1940. Here, tank officers and crewmen receive basic instruction in tank weapons and communications, and also in automotive principles, until they know their way around a tank, inside as well as out. Each tanker learns not only his own job, but what the man next to him and all other crew members will be doing. Drivers get a thorough apprenticeship over a tank course studded with obstacles. The tank is expected to perform efficiently on muddy mountain trails or snow-covered highways. Time trials add an extra element of pressure. Time spices the competition in training, but is vital in combat. Gunners acquire the essentials of ammunition knowledge and firing techniques.
All right, let's get started. Here are the 4 main types of ammunition you'll be dealing with. The name of each one tells its own story. This is shot, a high-velocity projectile that drills its way through heavily armored targets. This is hypershot. It has a terrific muzzle velocity. You probably fired it in basic, so you know how fast it gets out there. Both shot and hypershot can punch holes in heavily armored targets like tanks, pillboxes, and fortifications. Both projectiles have a tracer element in the base. When you fire them, you can see a reddish glow marking the shot.
After this session on the big guns, they get a chance to test their machine gun prowess on ground targets. The machine gun is the tank's payoff weapon at close range. As the members of the tank crew begin to function as a unit, They are drilled in such coordinated operations as the capture and search of prisoners, an important factor in assembling of military intelligence. For tank leaders who must meet particularly high standards of alertness and resourcefulness, there is a rigorous special test. Advanced tank training at the division level is carried on both at Fort Knox and at other bases scattered around the country. The 7th Armored Division, for example, was training in the fall of 1952 at Camp Roberts in the west central section of California. A mock attack on a village provides valuable experience in combat tactics. The tank has a specific and limited assignment. Such exercises bring the tanker into close contact with his rifle-carrying sidekick, here shown, being rescued in a simulated combat zone. This kind of painstaking drill worked out under friendly conditions may mean the difference between life and death on some future battlefield. Farther south in California, at Camp Irwin, large units undergo training in advanced tank maneuvers. These include training in tank movements, counterattacks, and delaying actions. The tank is particularly well equipped to cover orderly withdrawals. After concentrating heavy firepower from behind the safety of its armor, it is able to rapidly leave the area. Various formations are practiced and repeated in pursuit of the letter-perfect coordination that must be achieved for combat effectiveness. An exercise in mobile defense involves liaison with reconnaissance aircraft.
Oscar 6, this is EZ7. Enemy column, near coordinates 267-515. Heading south on road. About 15 tanks, plus 5 infantry carriers. Also nearly a company of dismounted infantry, with about 15 tanks. At coordinates 266-512. Advancing through the wooded area west of the road. I'll call for artillery fire. Over. Roger, out.
The fine points of tank infantry coordination are practiced until they become a matter of instinct. Here, riflemen wait for tank flamethrowers to burn out enemy pillboxes, after which the foot soldiers can resume their advance. In larger operations, tanks may coordinate with air napalm attacks to reduce enemy opposition. Here is the climax of training in night vision and night maneuvers. This is as close to the real thing as human ingenuity can make it without risking American lives. The armored units are now ready for their missions in the world's tension zones. For today, American armor stands guard for democracy not only in the Far East, but along the European borders of the Iron Curtain. In Western Germany, once again on the job, is the hard-hitting 2nd Armored Division. Here seen during World War II in the brilliant dash that carried it across France and through the Siegfried Line. After the war, the 2nd Armored became a training division at Fort Knox, and then in 1949 was transferred to Camp Hood in Texas for final brushing up before returning overseas. Texans enthusiastically greet the proud wearers of the Hell on Wheels insignia. Passing in review is a big package of American mechanized strength, the full armored division. Its massive tank power is backed up by mobile infantry, artillery, engineers, and other supporting elements. At Camp Hood, the men of the 2nd Armored had a spell of routine camp existence. Daily maneuvers brought their battlefield skills to a final peak. But before many months, there was another mammoth parade, this time in Farewell to the States. First step in the 5,000-mile trek to Germany was a train ride to the port of Houston. Finally, there came the inevitable farewells. Up the gangplank marched the men of the 2nd, back to the jittery continent from which they had helped to sweep the Nazis 6 years before. After a friendly welcome on their arrival at Bremerhaven, Germany, they continued on to their assigned base at Baumholder near Mannheim. It takes a lot of moving to transfer the full power of an armored division. But it didn't take long for the men of the 2nd to set up in business again. Soon they were honored by the arrival of a distinguished visitor. And then another. The 2nd Armored, guarding the gateway to Western Europe, is constantly engaged in maneuvers, testing the latest developments in equipment and operational techniques. Here they try out the effectiveness of newly landed M47 Patton tanks in crossing blown tank traps. The big tanks take something over 6 minutes to cross TNT-made craters of the so-called deliberate type. For the smaller, hasty craters, they need only 2 minutes. A leapfrog advance is practiced by 2 tank teams. First, Team 1 moves forward under covering fire from Team 2. When the first team has captured high ground, it swings its guns around to protect Team 2, and the covering process is reversed. Here, Team 1, having seized the protective position, signals to Team 2 that they can come forward. Besides its own maneuvers, the 2nd Armored plays an important part in joint Allied exercises. Its armored weight, a quiet warning to the Kremlin that democracy will brook no aggression in Western Europe. The tanks of the armored force are supplemented by self-propelled big guns and other vehicles built on similar principles of design. Included in this group are amphibious personnel carriers and tracked motor carriages which may mount machine guns or anti-aircraft guns. A well-known World War II vehicle was the amphibious Weasel, now being replaced by the more powerful Otter, which can maintain a land speed of 30 miles an hour and carry twice the cargo. But the heart of the armored force is still the tank. Under present Army structure, besides the mechanized armored divisions, there are tank components assigned to all infantry forces. 1 tank battalion per division, and a tank company for every infantry regiment. The division normally has 9 light tanks and 140 mediums. These tank models are being constantly improved by the Army's Ordnance Corps. Latest entry in the lightweight class is the 26-ton Walker Bulldog. Replacing the Chaffee used early in Korea, the Walker can speed 40 miles an hour and climb a 60% slope. In the medium class, America now has the Patton 48, first completely new medium model designed and built since the end of the war. This Ordnance and Chrysler designed vehicle, with its 810 horsepower engine, combines the best features of the Sherman, Pershing, and Patton 46. Like the earlier post-war medium tanks, the M48 has a 90mm gun, but it is superior to its predecessors in virtually every other respect. Its high-velocity big gun has a quick-change gun tube. Another innovation is an extra 50 caliber machine gun for the use of the tank commander, which can be aimed, fired, and reloaded from inside the tank. The sloping armor and low silhouette present a difficult target to the enemy. The elliptical shape of the hull and turret is designed to deflect shells. A redesigned interior provides more fighting room, better vision, and a reduced crew of 4 men. With its wider and more powerful treads, the Patton 48 can roar up swiftly from a deep ditch. Thorough waterproofing enables it to take a 4-foot water hazard and come out fighting. But even with these formidable new weapons, the Army does not rest on its laurels. It keeps pace with the latest scientific developments in the laboratories of the government and of private industry through its design service, Army Ordnance. Always the search goes forward for better metals, more ingenious combinations of firepower, mobility, and protection. For as long as the threat of aggression persists in the world, the armored force, triumphant in Europe, doubly tested in the hills of Korea, stands ready in defense of liberty.
Improvements in both tank development and tank warfare are going on continually. Our Army and American industry is making certain that the armored force will continue to possess the up-to-date, mobile firepower that has proven so successful in World War II and in Korea. Now, this is Sergeant Stuart Queen inviting you to be with us next week for another story in the big picture.
The Big Picture is a weekly television report to the nation on the activities of the Army at home and overseas. Produced by the Signal Corps Pictorial Center. Presented by the U.S. Army in cooperation with this station. You can be an important part of the big picture. You can proudly serve with the best equipped, the best trained, the best fighting team in the world today, the United States.